Hi, Gulliver. Alexander Lukashenko really thinks he's won, but has he? What's your take on it?
Well, certainly opposition activists say that they are not giving up and that they expect renewed protests in the springtime. But a few months ago, when this All Belarusian People's Assembly was first mooted, Alexander Lukashenko seemed to be under much, much stronger pressure. And there was talk that this assembly would deliver some kind of constitutional reform with perhaps at least some kind of a transfer of power to other bodies in a bid to try to satisfy the opposition. Today, it looks much more like he's just having a victory lap. There are green and red flags back all over the streets of Minsk. That's the official flag of the regime, as against the red and white flag that is the flag of the opposition. And if you look at videos of this All Belarusian People's Assembly, it looks like a Soviet-style gathering with a huge amphitheater in which everyone's voting unanimously. And Alexander Lukashenko opened it with a speech saying, well, we kept our country so far. That's the language he uses. But we need to keep fighting. And he keeps talking about the idea of Belarus, his regime in Belarus, being under some kind of an attack from abroad rather than from its own people, unsatisfied with the election results. He did admit that maybe he didn't win the election by the 80% he claimed to have won it by last August, but maybe it was something like 68 or 74%. I don't know where he gets those figures from, but certainly he seems for the moment to be pretty satisfied. Protests in Belarus have died down. They're still going on, but with much, much smaller numbers. I think that's partly to do with fatigue, with no sense that anything's really changing, and Lukashenko is still determined to hold on to power. Partly it's, of course, to do with the winter and the cold weather, and partly, and sadly, it is the success of the very, very heavy-handed tactics used by the police against opposition activists. Human rights activists estimate that there are currently 246 political prisoners at the moment. Conditions in Belarusian jails are awful. There are very credible reports of people being systematically tortured and beaten when they're arrested by the police. That puts people off. There are also a lot of journalists who've been arrested, including the head of the Belarus press club, Yulia Slutskaya. I spoke to her deputy, who was in Warsaw, Poland, a few days ago, and she was in an absolutely grim mood. She thinks that the only thing that's really going to make this regime budge would be strong actions from abroad, strong sanctions against the regime, which would have to inflict also pain on the Belarusian people before things really changed.
OK, so certainly creating the image of having won and the optics very much going in that direction. But what do we know concretely, Gulliver, about the levels of support on the ground for Lukashenko and for the opposition?
Well, there's actually a new study that's just been published, carried out for the London-based think tank Chatham House, which suggests that there are a hardcore 37% of Belarusians who are protest supporters and very actively in favor of the protest movement. And then on top of that, 20% who are broadly sympathizers. So that gets you to over 50% of Belarusians in support of the opposition movement. At the other end of the spectrum, though, there are 18% that, according to this study, are hardcore supporters of Alexander Lukashenko. And then in the middle, you've got a lot of people who are indifferent or just very discouraged by the lack of change and not really inclined to think that these kinds of movements can get you anywhere, but not all that keen on Alexander Lukashenko either.